Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Jolin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Results for America. I also want to thank our partners, the U.S. Conference of Mayors and Bloomberg Philanthropies, for this great session today. We're going to be talking to you about grant opportunities for charging and fueling infrastructure. The bipartisan infrastructure law made large investments in charging and fueling infrastructure to accelerate this shift towards electric vehicles and alternative fueling. The first round of CFI winners has already been announced. So today we're going to explore how these grantees are using funds for workforce development programs, planning, increasing access for disadvantaged communities, regional and statewide collaborations to expand their coverage, and also what opportunities exist for cities and towns that are looking for CFI funding. Our speakers today are going to share some best practices for both towns and cities that are beginning to plan for their local charging and fueling infrastructure, and those that have previously applied for CFI funding to help you kickstart your town or city's application process. As always, we want this to be an interactive session, so we encourage you to post your questions, all your questions, and as well as your experiences in this process in the chat throughout this whole session. We'll be getting to as many of our questions as possible after the speakers speak and after our panel. But first, I want to welcome our first speakers who are joining us for important federal positions. Gabe Klein, Executive Director of the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, and Keith Benjamin, who's the Associate Administrator for Highway Policy and External Affairs at the Federal Highway Administration. Gabe and Keith, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be here. You know, it was raining this morning, so I wore a hat, so I'll just apologize for my hair up front. Keith, you always look great. Yeah, I've known Keith for a long time, since even before he ran Charleston DOT. It's always great to be with him, and you know, as evidenced by the fact that Keith and I are here, and many others in the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy. There's a lot of people here that understand what it's like to work in a city, to work for a mayor. You know, I ran the Chicago DOT for Rahm Emanuel, the DC DOT for Adrian Fenty. As I said, Keith also ran a city DOT. So we very much are sympathetic and get what you guys are going for. And I want to thank Bloomberg, U.S. Conference of Mayors, for having us today. It's really important for us to get this information out. If we can put the slides up, I'm going to run through a deck quickly, particularly the first part very quickly, because I know that for the most part, people know what our programs are. But I just, you know, for those that don't, I just want to run through this really quickly. And, you know, it is important to note that we are here to accelerate this electrified transportation system. We work every day across DOT and DOE and with the White House. And while a lot of the programs and the funding actually originate in federal highways, we coordinate with them regularly on formulating policy, analyzing data with the national labs for decision making, and of course on technical assistance. And it is important also that the vision is for a future where everyone can ride and drive electric. We recognize that in urban areas, whether it's a small town or a big city or even a tribal nation, the context is different and not everybody wants to necessarily own a vehicle. And we are here for that. Next slide. So when you think about the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, by the way, this is the first office the federal government has ever started that span multiple agencies. You know, we are here to support all of our brethren, DOT, DOE, also EPA, FTA with the Lono program and Clean School Bus, to leverage all of this, but to look across all of it also to make sure that it's coordinated from a systemic standpoint. We want to make sure that when you have questions about electrification or hydrogen, clean fuels, infrastructure that relates to it, you can come to us. We may not have all the answers, but we will help you find it. We know that even for local government, the federal government can be very opaque. And so we will take that upon ourselves to get you the answers. We very much are serving as a convener. Some of you have probably heard of the EV working group that we put together. We are also working quite a bit with the private sector, NGOs, universities. I would say the private sector is absolutely crucial as they are building, operating, and maintaining the majority of the zero emissions infrastructure. And then last, we're focusing on not just ROI, although that's huge, but the fully loaded social return on investment. And we want to make sure that with our funds that we have a $300 million operating budget, we're taking some of our money and putting it out there, particularly for cities and towns, to pilot new programs to test outcomes versus just chargers. Next slide. So in terms of what we support, I'll go through this very quickly. This is the $5 billion NEVI program that is administered by Federal Highways. We support that. And within that is the 10% set aside of $460 million. Some of you know that $148 million was just released for the repair and replace program. The CFI grants, which we're primarily here to talk about today, $2.5 billion, $623 million has gone out. It's not just limited to electric chargers. LONO, I just mentioned, USDOT at FTA. And there was another release last week for, what was the key, like $1.5 billion, I think, out of that fund. And then a couple weeks ago, EPA put out another $1 billion for Clean School Bus. Next slide. So in particular with CFI funding, as I mentioned, $623 million was awarded, 47 projects, 22 states, and it's going to build about 7,500 ports. And you can see the states where that is going. I think we had like 3.7 billion in ask. And so I know you're going to be asking Keith, when is the next tranche coming and all of that. I mean, there were a lot of great projects, and we know a lot of people are going to resubmit. Next slide. There are corridor, and there's 1.25 billion for corridor, and there's 1.25 billion for community or / cities and towns. So on the corridor side, these are example projects. North Central Texas Council of Governments got 70 million for hydrogen fueling stations. So, you know, it's not just about, well, it's not about replicating what NEVI would do, right? It's also about supplementing. And this particular project for medium heavy duty, we think is, you know, a great project, really important, and particularly for that I-10 corridor. And then 15 million to Energy Northwest. This is a joint operating agency in Washington State. Note that it's 40 fast chargers, also 12 level 2 chargers. So while NEVI is focused on DC fast chargers, the CFI grants are more flexible. And this will provide access to rural and disadvantaged communities, which is very important to the program and to the administration. Next slide. Community. And I know this is what a lot of you are here for and care about. Some great projects. I was really excited about the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection project. This was a multimodal project, car sharing, bike sharing, so on and so forth, building EV charging stations in disadvantaged communities at multifamily housing. The Maryland Clean Energy Center, I actually went with Deputy Secretary Trottenberg out there for this launch at Coppin State University, at a historically Black college, where the Coppin State is like at the center of it, but it's providing the entire community with EV charging, both fast charging and level 2 charging, and has workforce development, which means that, you know, we're able to not only create jobs for people, but also some generational wealth opportunities for new firms that are springing up to service this area. And then last, 15 million to Contra Costa in California. Again, a lot of level 2 chargers, and they're doing it at the library system. So it's accessible. One thing that's important to remember, these need to be accessible to everybody in the public. Next slide. We also had our own ride and drive electric funding opportunity. You can go to our website and you can actually look at that, but you can see what states won what. We had innovative implementation for cities and towns, for new business models and so forth. We had resilience. There's some really interesting projects, and I would encourage you to go to our website, but I'm going to go fast here because I want to give Keith a chance to speak as well. But we do hope to put another FOA of our own out in the next few months as well. So look for more innovation there. Smaller awards, but innovative topics. Next slide. And last but not least, we are here to serve you, the people that are on this call. Again, we know the federal government is opaque. We know that this is highly technical, and that particularly for departments of transportation or public works that have not built chargers before, this is all new. We also know that you may not have a lot of experience dealing with your state energy office or your local energy office if you're in a town or city. We are here to make those connections. And so we have 50 staff members across 10 organizations. And if you go to our website, which is on there on the right, we promise you response within 48 hours to your questions through our concierge service. But we can also go deeper. We can do route analysis for transit. We can do site and design. We can do battery storage solutions. So don't forget that we have multiple national labs behind us. And a lot of these people are absolutely amazing and technically superb, and work on a lot of research and development and love the idea of working on real implementation projects with cities and towns. So don't be shy. We have 100 spots a year for more technical, like deep dive implementation. And with that, I will end and turn it over to my good friend, Keith.
Thanks so much, Gabe, and thanks, Jamie, and others who helped plan this for Bloomberg. It's good to be with city folk, as Gabe said. Again, my name is Keith Benjamin, Associate Administrator for Federal Highways for our Highway Policy and External Affairs. But before this was having to sit in a number of your shoes, trying to figure out how to shift the culture of our communities in a way of accessibility and safety and access. And so the opportunity to be at the federal level and work in coordination with the Joint Office with DOE, not just of putting out money or putting out new policy, but thinking critically about how is this actually going to operate on the ground and how is this going to be a benefit to all, is just a real privilege, quite frankly, to be able to be engaged in. And so what I want to do, because we talked about this, Gabe and I talked about this before, we really want to get to your questions and want to be as much of a resource as possible. I just want to lay out 3 quick things to keep in mind regarding the entirety of our NEVI program. As Gabe iterated, today we're talking about the charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary program, but that is just one part of federal highways funding that we've been entrusted with to implement EV infrastructure. You have the National Electric Vehicle Program, which has our formula dollars that are being allocated to our states, and also responsibilities that our states have for state planning for our alternative fuel corridors. We have our discretionary program, and then we have what's called we jokingly call it our 10% set aside, but it's this a pot of additional funds that help us be able to fill the gaps that we see as we start seeing the build out of this infrastructure. The first crop of that funds, about 180 million, really went to fixing or replacing or repairing existing infrastructure. But we're looking forward to that next slew of funding that can really help us on the equity front as much as possible. Here are the 3 things I wanted to just leave with you all real quick, and then can get to questions. One is, I want to make sure that you know that we need your voice in the decision-making process for all of NEVI. we are talking today about the discretionary program, but one of the things that was really critical in the planning process that that states are obligated to do, that lays out their plans for their corridors for EV infrastructure, was that they had to lay out to us their methodologies and their public engagement strategies for how they would actually implement their plan. And that means being able to hear from a community, hear from local entities that see what's happening on the ground and be able to lend their voice there. And we just really want to encourage you, if you have not looked at the state plan for implementation of EV infrastructure, especially along major corridors, really encourage you to do so, to see how that aligns with some of the work that you might be doing in your local city, where there may not be alignment and there needs to be collaboration and conversation to work there, or what you might be hearing from your own constituents that is imperative voice to add to how this looks like from a built-out perspective. The second thing I would raise is our success of the program is not just about giving out awards. We're beyond excited about the CFI program, the dollars that we're able to get out, but also the level of demand that was there. But our baseline of success is very much, as Gabe was mentioning, who is benefiting from it, because we want to make sure all are benefiting from it, but what also that looks like from a wealth creation perspective and a workforce perspective too. With a number of the grantees this year, we not only saw what their plans were for introducing EV infrastructure, but also what that meant for the communities that would be influenced. And so when you think about Connecticut, 2 rural communities in Connecticut that are awarded 14.7 million for their neighborhoods and rural communities, they actually incorporated an apprenticeship program within their project that's going to be hiring young people, college students, and otherwise to assist as they build out their infrastructure. When you think about in Atlanta, Georgia, them moving forward with a project for multi-unit dwellings and what that's going to look like for those who may not own a vehicle, but be able to access it in various different shared vehicles in various different ways. In New Mexico, when we talk about our corridor funding and what that means for being able to have lower emissions on our major highways and how that influences nearby underserved communities, thinking about what that implementation looks like for our tribal communities, like for example in Alaska, where there's a tribe who is building out an entire community that's going to be accessible and have multimodal uses in their community, and EV infrastructure is a central part of that. These type of projects have been intriguing to us, and we were excited about being able to fund them, and you definitely want to be able to support other such projects that come through our following rounds. The last piece that I'll raise is we are focused on ensuring your success in all of our funding within federal highways, but specifically today around EV infrastructure. You heard some of the amazing technical assistance that comes directly from our joint office, and that's something that they're working on a regular basis. But for many of you, as you know, when you apply for federal funds and you may not get it that first year, there's some tools and opportunities that are available to you. We are right in the middle of scheduling our debrief opportunities for those that were unsuccessful in getting awards this year, but want to be able to take advantage of understanding where they can improve and otherwise. And I just want to put a period here because as someone who was a former director of transportation, we applied for funding specifically for a major bike and pedestrian bridge and didn't get it our first year. But we did not know that we had made some missteps on our cost benefit analysis. We would have not known that until we had our debrief. We had that debrief, made those tweaks, and ended up funded that following year. And so really, really encourage taking advantage of our debrief process. If you're interested in that, please email us at cfigrants@dot.gov. I'll try to put that email in the chat as well, because we want to make sure we're as much of a support to you as well. Please do also use our DOT Navigator, our other technical assistance arms regarding all of our grant processes, all of our opportunities with federal highways. But we want to make sure that you understand the program, but also can be putting forth an application that can be successful with this. So thank you for joining us today. Definitely look forward to taking your questions and being able to be a resource.
Thank you both. Thank you, Gabe and Keith. So now we'll open up for questions. Please continue to add questions in the chat, and then we will call on you to come off camera and ask your question. While you're putting your questions into the chat, I wanted to remind everyone about an exciting opportunity for all of our cities that have a population of under 150,000. So that's the local infrastructure hub is offering free grant assistance boot camps on a range of federal funding programs, but this includes CFI. We have a full-scale boot camp that leads cities to the aspects of filling out the developing the CFI application, and a more targeted set of supports that would include sort of one-time help on the CFI application in particular. The registration for this National League of Cities program is actually closed. The deadline has closed, but they've decided to extend it. So if you're interested, please contact Katie Dallinger at nlc.org, and she will make sure you get into the program. So questions for Gabe and Keith. Gabe, let me just grab one here. It says, can you just tell us a little bit more about what is exciting you at the joint office right now and at DOT, and sort of what are the things you're most excited about in the applications for 2024 for CFI?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think there'll be more money coming relatively soon. You won't have to wait till 2025. I think that we're seeing a lot of demand from cities and communities, which is great, right? Also, we know that, putting chargers or fueling infrastructure in disadvantaged communities is one way to reach people. But we also know that people have places that they go to work, that they go to play, to pray, to shop. And so, as time goes on, I think, we'll be looking more broadly at how to serve people versus just looking at placing chargers, let's say, where people live to serve a disadvantaged community. So that's one thing. I would say that we are excited about the number of less expensive vehicles that have come out to serve people, whether it be the Chevy Bolt, which is now sub $20,000, whether it be the used car market, which we're seeing now prices are actually going down further on new and used cars. Plus, we have a $4,000 IRA tax credit. So for lower income people, there's a lot of options. And then last, I would say we're seeing a lot of demand for multimodal charging. And I was on a C40 call, and like the first question I got was, how do we think about multimodal? We know that a lot of this money is sort of earmarked for, light duty vehicle charging for the most part, or medium duty, heavy duty. Well, here's the thing. From my experience building complex capital projects in cities, a streetcar, for example, or, a streetscape or parking meters, the bulk of the cost is the construction in the public right of way. And so what we're really encouraging mayors and DOT teams, DOE teams to look at is integrated planning, right? And dig once. So if you can think about, if you're going to be putting one DC fast charger in, think about stubbing out the entire block for level 2 chargers. Think about what you need for your bike share program. Maybe you have a kiosk program. Like, get as much out of those dollars as you can, and integrated planning is the way to do it. And our technical assistance team can help walk folks through that as well.
Very helpful. So a specific question, can you comment on whether the CFI funding is open to level 2 charging stations and not just level 3? It's level 2 as well. Is that correct?
Yes. And so this is where people get confused and Keith, feel free to jump in on this too, because he's the expert on the federal highways funding. But on the NEVI program, there's this thing called fully built out status, and Keith can talk about maybe what that means, right? And once you reach fully built out, then you can actually spend that money on level 2 chargers as well. And then with the CFI grants, it's absolutely open. But I'll let Keith elaborate.
Yeah, very much fully open. I think one of the other parts of our NEVI program at Federal is that we didn't talk about just because it gets into the technicalities is the regulation that we move forward with the NEVI program as well. We wanted a baseline regulation of like how we wanted to see the build out of our electric vehicle infrastructure. And so the implementation of level 2 is very much welcomed. Actually, in our regs, it's actually preferred for that. And that was not a baseline, even at multifamily housing. We have projects that were funded this year that are moving forward in various communities, both rural and in urban areas that are implementing level 2. So that is not a limiting factor at all.
That's helpful. So one last question, we're going to run out of time, but Larry Smallwood from the city of Phoenix, do you want to ask your question?
Certainly. So I had a question based off of our FY22 application and some of the conversations that we've had with other communities. And it seemed like there was a little bit of preference that was given towards public-private partnerships and ways of engaging with businesses, much like earlier in the presentation when it was mentioned to generate wealth for small businesses. And I was just kind of wondering if there was any insight-sharing businesses and opportunities like that to installations that are on basically government-owned property that maybe wouldn't have those same benefits for the small businesses.
So there's two things that you mentioned there, and I think we lost part of what you said. So hopefully we got the full gist. But in terms of the wealth creation aspect, one of the biggest things we wanted to see in the CFI program was what the engagement strategy was going to be around who was going to be involved in assisting in the build out, and really wanting to see the emphasis on the type of private entities that would be involved in that process and asking for narrative there, especially because in congressional statute, there was a lot of limiting factors on how we could engage on disadvantaged, women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned businesses in the process for state allocated funding. We wanted to make sure that that was a part of the consideration in the projects that were being put forward, right? Because you're going to get funding, you're going to have to bid that out. What does that look like in terms of who's participating from your community or otherwise new upcoming businesses that can be engaged in actually building that out? And so being able to see that is a big part of that. To your other part in terms of municipalities and where the placement of them are, we definitely encourage that. The one example that just comes to mind off the top is in San Quentin in California, their housing authority for the county was one of the partners where they're actually implementing EV infrastructure. And so that is not a disqualifier at all for the municipality wanting to be engaged in seeing their EV infrastructure implemented. We'll just lean into something that Gabe said earlier, that the goal is for this is be accessible for everyone. And so even if it's on municipal owned property, the factor there to keep in mind is that it's as accessible as possible to everyone.
But just to chime in, I think to the core question about whether it's on public or private property, I don't think that matters. You know, the state of Rhode Island is doing their entire program on public property. For instance, for the NEVI program, there's quasi-public property in Maryland for that project that I was talking about. So if you feel like there's a, for Mr. Smallwood, like, I don't think there's any bias against private property. To Keith's point, it's about making sure that wherever it is, that everybody's getting to participate in the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Gabe. We're now going to turn over to our panel with some mayors, and I'm pleased to introduce Matt Stevens-Rich, who's the Director of Technical Services at the Electrification Coalition. Matt's going to moderate our panel of mayors and their teams, and so thank you for joining us, Matt. Over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Michelle. And yeah, I get the fun part here, and appreciate Keith and Gabe really giving some perspective from the federal side. Definitely a lot of questions about what went well and what can be learned upon. But so too, to add to that, I'm really privileged to have the chance to lead a moderated panel here with a couple cities who were awarded through CFI award application. The Electrification Coalition, for those of you not familiar, we're a national nonprofit that works across all priorities of transportation, electrification, and scaling, chief of which is actually working with partners such as the Local Infrastructure Hub, where we are running the current boot camp on the CFI round 2 preparation. So I know a number of folks are dropping questions in the chat. Do check out the listing, which you can see on the Local Infrastructure Hub website. Cannot recommend enough. Well worth looking at joining, especially if there's any key grants you're looking at, be it CFI or others. But I'll get to the introductions really quick. So we're joined by 3 award applicant cities here and respective staff. So first we have Mayor Andy Schor from Lansing, Michigan. We also then have Mayor Lauren McLean from Boise, Idaho. And then finally, Mayor Steve Patterson, who's just down the street from me in Athens, Ohio. And really excited to highlight all these cities. We have a great capture here, like Gabe and Keith were alluding to. There was a lot of really exciting award across rural, metro, all parts of America. So we have a really great capture here. But maybe I have a couple prepped questions here. Do keep questions coming in the chat, which we'll be able to shift to as well. But just a little bit, I have a couple all of the above questions, which I'll go to our respective mayors in turn, and then maybe a couple one-off questions unique to some of your different approaches, because there's a lot of cool example here. But first, and this is maybe like the chief question, is how do you get a project process like this started? It's a little intimidating when you're talking about millions of dollars and all these charging station planning, so many partners. Mayor McLean, I see you're off mute, so we'll have you go first. How do you get the ball rolling on this?
Well, I want to say thanks so much for having us today, and thanks to the administration for this incredible opportunity to help us as cities advance our climate goals. I would say the easy answer to this one is we got this project going because we've got a great team of people in our Climate Action Division and Public Works, which is within our Public Works Department, that are helping us meet our carbon neutral goals citywide. And then a great number of partners, whether it be the Treasure Valley Clean Cities Coalition, others within the community that are helping us identify this need. And then our community engagement department that is, now tasked with our Climate Action Division to implement this and to spend this $3.2 million that we were awarded and implement the plan that we've got to make charging accessible to everyone throughout Boise.
Mayor Schor, how did you get the ball rolling?
It's hard to follow Mayor McLean because, I want to say the same things. The best way to get the ball rolling is to have the best staff. And I know my staff is watching, so I want to, being mayors, it's great because you get to take all the credit. But we had just had an incredible staff. We have someone that focuses on doing grants. We saw it and we said, we're Lansing and we're a little smaller than some of the other communities, but we're gonna go after it. We're gonna create a great coalition. So we did. We put together a great capital area coalition here. We're the capital city of Michigan. We brought in some of our urban and rural neighbors so that we could spread it around. But our staff they put together an incredible proposal. They worked with the Michigan Clean Cities. They worked with our utility, our Board of Water and Light. They worked with our Tri-County Planning Commission. So you take the best staff in the world, no offense, other mayors, take the best staff in the world, make sure that they know your vision, and then you let them go and you let them get partners, and they did a great job.
Great, Mayor Patterson. You're allowed to say best staff in the world too, but
yeah, you're gonna have a trifecta here. Yeah, it is so much predicated upon your staff, but it's also predicated upon your connectivity and the relationships that you have, partners that you are able to rely on and tap into. With our successful CFI grant under the communities category, we explored a lot of things. I have to give a shout out to the Local Infrastructure Hub, which is great for small and medium-sized cities. Being the second vice president for the National League of Cities, we took full advantage of that program, went through the 4-month-long boot camp and came out the other end with a small grant. Not small, but it was a good sized grant. But then we started thinking, we've got partners all over, to include Sustainable Ohio Public Energy Council, which is a community choice aggregation, and worked hard with their grant writer, Dana, Dana Vingrist was amazing for pulling together 28 partners in making this grant work, to where it was dedicating a lot of work towards smaller communities in Appalachian, Ohio, but all the way to large cities like Dayton, Ohio, to where we had basically covering 94% of our grant components were for disadvantaged communities. And we're, but going back to my point, it's making sure that you're leveraging the partners that you've got and those connections that you have.
Yeah, no, Mayor Patterson, Athens is a unique boat that it was technically a utility who was the lead applicant compared to cities that we saw across Boise and Lansing. That actually points to a really good follow-up question for the three of you. Because indeed, you're pointing to the moment, we saw it a lot. Folks were seeing the CFI opportunity, planning out charging in their own immediate municipality or part of the country, but then realizing there's a regional approach opportunity here. We're hearing clean city coalitions, local infrastructure hub. What was that regional planning process like? Was that a matter of calling up your neighboring municipality, or what was that process experience like? And maybe Mayor Patterson, I'll kind of keep you on the ball, and we'll work it back.
Sure. It was kind of a combination of what you're just getting at. After we went through the boot camp and had a product, we were looking at Athens County, and that's 62 to 64,000 citizens within the county itself. And it would have connected a lot of the villages and the two cities, Athens being one of them in the county. But then we started thinking bigger. Well, let's tap into our local development district, the LDD, which is 8 counties. And so we started working with those partners. And then we saw, this is growing so large, no longer can the city of Athens be the lead applicant, yet we knew we had a great product. And that's when we worked with Sustainable Ohio Public Energy Council. They took the ball and really ran with it. And know this, that, and this is important, when you look at the partners that are in this and you look at the communities that are part of this, we have villages ranging in the size of 600 citizens all the way up to Dayton, Ohio, which is, a very large community. And for the smaller communities, this is wish list stuff, right? This is things where they don't have the capacity. They would love to have it because they know they're losing on the EV tourism with people who are going to be passing through or engaging in their communities, but people having charging anxiety, and so they're not going to go there. So this is those things that they wish they could have. And so that was where SOPEC really stepped up and was able to help with our smaller villages and overcome them. And I'd say the majority of the locations are those smaller villages that are going to be getting not only level 2s, but level 3s.
No, great points. Mayor McLean, what was it like in Boise, talking to fellow Idahoans?
Yeah, so we took the approach that we need to talk to everybody in advance that we might be working with if we won. Because we recognized that there were resources for the state, and the state was going to do its own planning. And so a lot of the areas around Boise would likely get covered. We wanted to make sure Boise got covered, which is why we submitted our own grant. But the conversations that we had extended beyond the city. We talked to universities, we talked with labor unions and electrification councils, the Treasure Valley Clean Cities Coalition I mentioned, great partnership and conversations with our power company, Idaho Power, that also has a goal to provide 100% clean electricity by 2040. Ours as a city is 2030. I like to say we're going to help them make their goal by, encouraging them to find a whole bunch of new power sources. And we talked with the state of Idaho, and so had a sense of what they were looking at for their own federal requirements for the funds that they were to receive, and the plans they were going to put in, and then looked at what we could do to make. When we've got carbon neutrality goals and we know that transportation is 48% of that, we've got to electrify transportation. And so not only our fleet, but we've got to help the community feel as though this is doable, accessible, that you won't get stuck on a road somewhere. And so in the conversations that we had for the planning, we looked at our overarching decarbonization goals, and then thought about the community engagement and education goals that we have. And then mapped out and are mapping out a plan to not only engage the public, but to place these in ways that will make this accessible and the transition to clean cars accessible for our residents.
No, those are such great points. Mayor Schor, what's it like being a larger capital city? I guess any different calculus to that?
Well, thank you for calling us a larger capital city.
Yeah, how big are you, Lansing? Good to see you, Andy.
But we feel bigger. We feel bigger than 113,000. But it's our region in the area is about 500,000. So you talk about kind of the regional impact. We believe in this very much. We believe that Michigan put the world on wheels. When you think about cars and you think about Michigan, we are very much interested in putting the world on electrified wheels. We want a $2.7 billion with a B battery plant, which is being built as we speak, and will be up and running this year. We are expecting to have some conversions for one of our 2 car assembly plants to include EV conversions. And now you can build it, you can make the battery, you can make the car, but someone in the chat posted, my car is running low and I don't have anywhere to charge in the city. We don't want that. We want to make sure that people are going to come here. We want to make sure they're going to come into the city. We want to make sure they're going to go in the township next door, into East Lansing to go see an MSU game, go green. These are all the things that you have to do. It doesn't end at the border. It doesn't end at the city's border. It ends, throughout the community. So when we look at the, Williamstown Township, which is a smaller rural township, when you look at Meridian Township, which is kind of a suburbia, you look at the city of East Lansing with the university, you look at the city of Lansing, the capital city. When people come to visit the capital and talk to their legislators and complain to state government, they got to have somewhere to charge their cars when they come to visit for events and things. So we very much feel that Michigan put the world on wheels. We'll put it on electrified wheels now. And if we don't have those charging stations, then their cars are going to die here, and we can't have that.
No, I love this capture across so many different approaches. Maybe a good last question I'll ask, and then I'll start kind of peppering in some questions from the audience. One was, everyone was given 3 months. Some of us maybe started some planning process a little bit in advance. Was there any additional tools, resources, and maybe, to be honest, as mayors, it's a thing of, you were approached by your staff with, hey, here's a really cool, exciting project. What did you need to learn how to, get your head around what this project was? And that can be helpful for other sustainability managers, others who are also trying to think about managing their mayor and helping them go through the process. I guess tools, resources, other tips to help folks as they try to wrap their head around project build out. And Mayor Schor, you're off mute still, so I'll throw it to you first.
I'll put it back on. I think we all have a vision, right? We're mayors, we're communities, we all have a vision. We all know generally what we want. When you see a program like this, you have to know how to talk about it. One of the things that I will admit, it's a point of pride. As soon as we won it, I got a lot of calls from folks saying, I put in this one of these. How did you get it? What did you do? We engage with folks who understand the grant writing process. You had somebody on earlier who said, if you didn't get a grant, we're going through, we're figuring out why, we're talking about what can be done differently. And we've had our fair share of missed grants also, but really understanding the language, understanding how to take your vision and put it into the language of the grant, so that the folks who are looking at it say, yep, that is exactly the point. When President Biden says we're going to have tens of thousands of new charging stations, you have to understand what that means. So again, for us, working together as communities, but working with Michigan Clean Cities and working with some of the experts who understand how do you translate that vision into language on a piece of paper, and then having our staff being able to do that, bring it to me, and me saying, yep, that is perfect. That's my best advice to people is don't just have the really good idea and the vision, but be able to verbalize that in the right way with the expectations. And for me, that was successful.
Mayor Patterson, I'll throw it to you. You did a shout out to the local infrastructure hub, which we had the pleasure of working with Andy and the team. So that was definitely one good example, but what else helped in the process from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say another thing that helped, again, was partnering with our partner, SOPEC, knowing the connection, knowing the touch points, and knowing how to speak to those communities, because most of them are SOPEC communities. And I think the added value is that, SOPEC was one of the first community choice aggregations to have 100% green product that they can offer to communities. And that resonates, I think, with people to where they knew that was going on. They saw that CFI was out there, didn't know how to approach it. Didn't have the capacity. There's always that fear factor to where if I get a grant, am I going to be able to follow through? And if I don't, I fall flat and I'm not able to deliver, then I'm going to be out a round or two or forever, whatever. And so it was having the relationships that SOPEC had already cultivated. And I'll just put one more plug in. The city of Athens, and we're home to Ohio University, go green. We are a very progressive community. We're one of the first communities in the nation to have a carbon fee that was a ballot initiative to where 76% of the community voted in the affirmative to have 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour added to their electric bill for solar projects. So it was really easy for Athens to understand. We have the lowest carbon emissions per capita in the state of Ohio. We're among the lowest in the nation, which isn't bad when you think that we're, recognize that we're a city of 23,849 people. So we're not a big community, but we recognize the real value of decarbonization.
Mayor McLean, what was Intel Insights resources that was helpful for the Boise process?
I guess I have the obligatory Go Broncos as capital city in Boise that's too big to be in the local infrastructure hub, home to Boise State and the blue turf. With that, I would say this. I mean, first off, our team that put together the application knew what we needed to do to meet our carbon neutral goals. So we've got aggressive goals as a city. First, we're going to do it at the city. We're going to take our learnings and then make it possible for the community to meet goals. We're going to do that too with carbon neutrality, first clean electricity, then carbon neutrality. So we know where we wanted to be, and this administration has created unparalleled opportunities to actually like turbocharge and advance where we all need to be faster with funding sources. And I wish we were, more successful more of the time in these. And so it is you can understand what the administration wants, have all the plans in place, and not always get to yes. In this case, we did. And I'd say it's because our plans and our desire to engage the community alongside as partners in our path to decarbonization and a resilient community into the future mirrors the administration goals of building communities up as we electrify, as we invest in manufacturing, return it to home, as we reinvest in infrastructure. So all those bills that have been passed have as a goal of building communities from the ground up. So we included workforce development, job fairs, community engagement, making it more accessible to residents to understand the job opportunities and economic opportunities, as well as the potential ease in the long run to transition to electric cars. And then we had our plans in place and knew what we need to do to meet our own goals. And so put all this together, and it was super exciting to be successful this time around.
No, that's a great point, Mayor McLean, especially thinking about workforce development, community engagement, which were encouraged and part required for grant approach. And indeed, I know each of our cities here were thinking about that as a part of the approach. Well, I'll move into some questions. And also, I believe Jamie will also put a poll up as well. So do feel free to respond to that as a part of general polling and helping with getting a sense of where folks are at in the process. But as folks are voting through that, I have a couple questions gleaned from the audience. I promise no big grillers that go into the weeds on your project descriptions. One question that actually a general trend is folks are asking about what was the decision process on charging, which actually I'll take in the direction of, I know across all of your applications, you were looking both at DC fast charge and level 2. I guess any insight to what was it like navigating what speed of charging to go with, or even the charging vendor, which for helpful reference for folks, this is something that can be bid out once successfully awarded. But I guess any insight that you were having to the process for choosing charging vendors or the level 2 versus DC fast charge. And I'll let you guys just come off of mute as you see fit. Mayor Schor, brave first step.
Talk about charging vendors. One of the things that I'm learning when you win a big grant like this, and we won $8 million, everybody sees it. Everybody sees, and everybody sends you emails asking you to pick their product. We're certainly going to be doing an RFP. We're going to be looking at the best product. We're going to be taking all the steps necessary. But I think that there are probably a lot of good vendors out there, and again, we're hearing from quite a few of them. So we certainly want the best possible product, and certainly with the charging capacity, being rural and urban throughout the area, you have to have the capacity to, we're working with our Board of Water and Light, and they're going to determine what makes the most sense for power. That'll be a big determinant.
Yeah, and to do a plug too for Local Infrastructure Hub, just to point back to registration has been extended. We do actually cover this in some of that boot camp delivery, talking through what does good charging planning look like, how to coordinate that. So I will gladly bump LIH through that. Maybe to add in another question here, which by and large, all the chargers that were applied for were using the J1772 standard on level 2, and then the CCS for DC fast charge. There's a lot of conversation around Tesla charging migration to NACS, now called J3400, which, and I know I'm throwing a lot of terminology here. By and large, CFI will still require everyone to be using that J1772 and CCS standards, but did that come up at all on questions across the team on what type of charging standard or other questions to that? Another one for the group, if that came up at all, as you were planning out the charging and maybe thinking about how many chargers go into the respective sites. We're getting a lot of charging questions, as you can imagine.
I'll jump in here. I would say that that's such a great question for the technical team that looked at where we needed things to go. That as mayor, I honestly can't answer that question of, did they go into that? I'm sure that they did, right? But even me repeating those numbers is a little difficult. I will say this, we had a plan for electrification. We looked at the types of chargers we needed and the locations where we could have them on publicly accessible sites. So thought about city buildings, city infrastructure, where could we put these things and what do we need? So then selected a number of sites for both the level 2 chargers and then the other kind, which here I am like stumbling over the other kind, in where we could put multiples within a site to give folks the option to be able to get around and charge as they needed to.
Well put.
Yeah, I could jump in too on this. One of the things that we were pretty mindful of is some of our partners were the school district, as well as identifying where in communities that may in the future be looking to have electrification of their school buses or even public transit. The city of Athens, we have an electric bus. And so we were mindful of that. And that's a situation when you're talking buses, they're going to need to drop onto something quickly, charge up to 80% in a short amount of time. So a DC fast charge is the way to go. So we were pretty strategic about locating where level 3s and level 2s need to be, where you're going to get the most bang for your buck at the end of the day. What's going to drive a lot of tourism is, again, laying that charging anxiety and putting them in a corridor where you've got a lot of retail, a lot of amenities that people can visit for 45 minutes to an hour or whatever. And so keeping that in your mind as you're planning these things out. But I think public transit is an important component, as is the school district's busing, allowing them to be able to apply for a lot of the IRA funding that's out there when it comes to bus electrification.
Yeah, indeed. And someone dropped the link. The transit bus electrification through Federal Transit Authority is actually currently out. So indeed, it's a busy time. And I'll leave this as the last question, and so appreciate each of you really sharing insight and perspective. General balance on charging you already have in the ground versus putting all this new awarded charging. Overall, was there any key strategy as you were looking at that? Mayor Patterson, you kind of pointed to that, thinking about what are existing infrastructure needs for fleet, for instance. In general, were you looking to just add charging to new destinations or expand charging at existing locations? And the answer I know for a lot of you might be a mix of both, but I guess curious if that came up at all as you were looking at sites as well.
I believe that it did. And I believe that where there's a lot of, in Southern Ohio, a lot of municipalities and areas where, you're not going to qualify for NEVI, at least at this point in time. And so to take this approach instead, There's no major interstates that run east-west through the southern part of the state of Ohio. You know, we've got US 33, we've got US 50, some smaller byways. And so this allowed us to think, how are we going to be able to extend connectivity in areas that might otherwise not see that at this point under NEVI, but you know, certainly through CFI, we were able to accomplish that. And so that was probably the main thing that we were looking at, addressing the small communities that just are going to be really challenged with being able to apply.
I appreciate that.
I mean, you said most people are going to say it's a mix. It is a mix, but because this is public chargers, we had the same thing. We're looking at our school districts. We're looking at public properties throughout the city and into the region. A lot of our private businesses have them. You know, you mentioned we have a Tesla charger bank on the south side. We do have a lot of kind of shotgun approach chargers based on where privates have put them. This is more strategic. You know we've got some city parking lots where people are going to park for, you know, for the day. We know we've got some areas in our business district that'll probably be there for lunch. You know where there's going to be capacity and what that capacity is. And that's pretty much how we're going to do it. But a lot of it will be new territory for us as a public entity. We got a few in our parking garages already. We had some of the early Volts because they're made here in Michigan. But certainly, you know, you need upgrades and you need to be able to make sure that these are staying as high tech as possible, as new as possible. So a lot of it is going to dictate the area and the use.
Yeah, and I'll echo that too. I mean, this grant is definitely for installation of charging ports, but we really looked at it as so much more. It's going to advance our charging needs, but it's also going to bring the community alongside with us to help us meet our overarching carbon neutral by 2050 or 2035 for city government needs. And this is public charging. So yes, there's private chargers. Yes, we already have charging in front of City Hall for the public, and our power company has put them in as well. And we've installed about 40 probably 6 years ago, but this will advance our goal, advance our needs and move the needle so much further than past investments would have or could have. But at the same time, as we're building, we're thinking about this. So our airport by September will be powered by 100% clean electricity. And in the new terminal, they're looking at charging ports for transportation of the future. We are only building all electric buildings, and they can tap into the geothermal if they're on it. But in all those public buildings that we're building now, we're creating the infrastructure for the city to use, and then as well looking at how the community can use it, and then doing that with our bus system and others in partnership.
Excellent. Well, no, I so appreciate each of you sharing your perspective. Thank you again to everyone also in the audience dropping questions. As a quick, I guess, just twofold, and then I'll throw it back to Michelle for closeout. You can find a link to all the resources we're sharing here, as well as great case studies on localinfrastructure.org. So do feel free, and the link's also dropped in the chat. And then finally, too, again, check out the boot camps that are currently open. It's not just CFI, there's Raise Grant. I know a number of other ones too, so definitely well worth checking that out. It would appear some folks have already been emailing, so it's great to see. Just chokes me up, but Michelle.
Getting emotional. That's excellent. Thanks so much, Matt. And thank you to our mayors. Thank you all for participating. As everyone has said, as you've seen from the links in the chat, please go to the Local Infrastructure Hub website. There's an enormous number of resources that you can find there that are relevant to the topic we've talked about today, but then also to others that you will be thinking about. So thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you all.